Welcome to the Hired Gun Podcast. I am Bobby Reeves. I'm Associate Pastor at Midway Hill Baptist Church. I am here with my daughter Lexi. Say hello, Lexi.
Hi.
She's waving. You can't wave on a podcast because this is not video. But anyway, this is our inaugural podcast, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We have a lot of content on the Midway Hill site that is both teaching and ministry. So we wanted to just add something that might be kind of fun and something for us to do. So we've got to work out the rough edges, but we're learning how to do this. We're going to have fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to have fun. And what we're going to do, the Hired Gun Podcast, I'll give you a little bit of background about where that comes from. Back in the day when I used to be in a band, and I was a drummer in a band. The band was the Hired Guns, and I was in it with Caleb Matthews, Jason Muse, and Joe Etherly, and we had a lot of fun with that. We did that. That's been years ago. So the intro music that you hear is a little bit of that. I want to give those guys credit because without them, we would have never had a band, and we are all believers in the band, and that's how it got started. Now, I started taking up the handle of the Hired Gun, just everything that I did, anything I went on social media. So when we were trying to come up with this idea, we thought, well, the Hired Gun Podcast. I thought that. I don't think Lexi thought that. I just asked Lexi to be involved because I didn't want to sit here and talk by myself to the computer because that's strange. But what we're going to do that's a little bit different on this podcast is essentially we're going to pick out some news stories. We're going to do this once a week. We're going to go through 3 to 4 news stories. I mean, we're not going to go through that many. I'm long-winded, and I'm trying to keep this to 25 minutes. I mean, we want to make it where people will stay around. But Lexi just keeps looking at me and nodding. But anyway, kind of like what we used to do with a day in the Word, when we'd do that Bible study. Except this is kind of the more comical elements of it, I guess. But we'll get some teaching in. We're definitely going to be. That's the backdrop of everything that we're doing is biblical, and a lot of the stories will have something to do with that. We may have a story or two that's kind of goofy, but anyway. So we got a few things that we're wanting to get into today. Some of the articles that I'd been reading. One was about Tim Allen, Tool Time guy, and I know him as Tool Time guy. Yeah. What's the Last Man Standing?
Yeah.
That's the newer show, and you know him as Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Lexi, she watched the Santa Claus movies,
They're
didn't
the
you?
best. Yeah.
Santa Claus. Anyway, so we're going to do a little story here over Tim Allen. Then later we're going to talk about some of the stuff that's going on with social media, kind of some pushback coming up concerning a bill that had been written, trying to get kids some safe guidelines for young people being on social media and kind of the ramifications of how much people are on social media. And we're going to talk about that. And then we have something special at the end. We're going to talk about a new line of cast iron skillets. I don't know why you're laughing because this is probably the most important thing we're going to do in the entire podcast is talking about the cast iron skillets because Dolly Parton, Jolene, Dolly Parton she's doing it all. She's cooking, she's singing, she's dancing, whatever.
She's a woman of many trades.
She's a woman of many trades. She's a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader last year, and we won't even get into that. But anyway, so our first story that we're going to talk about here is in the Christian Post. It's a story by Samantha Kamen, and it says, Tim Allen surprised after deep read of the Bible. Not at all what I was expecting. Now, Tim Allen's like 70 years old. I think that's what the article said. And the thing I think that first surprised me about it, the most surprised thing, says Tim Allen, I'm surprised that he's professed faith as long as he has. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to put him on blast.
Yeah.
But he's professed faith
Yeah.
quite a while.
Mhm.
Although everything he makes, all his TV shows may not be
Mm.
family friendly.
Yeah.
A lot of them are. But man, you're 70 and you're just now reading the Bible.
Yeah.
Do you think that's typical?
I don't. If for me, as long as he's professed a belief in Christ, I think he would have hit that a lot sooner than when just now.
Well, yeah, it just seems like it. But I mean, at the same time, we might be surprised. I'm sure there are a lot of folks who have not read their Bible through. I mean, the Bible's there's a lot to it. I mean, there's a lot of meat to the Bible, but not only that, it's one of those things that people will start. I think I heard, I can't remember who it was one time was, talking about getting into the scriptures, and it might have been Sproul. I think it was R.C. Sproul. It was him. He was talking about how people will start out, they get in Genesis and they're excited. Oh, it's exciting, and there's a lot in Genesis, a lot of the history. And then they get into Exodus and, they get half of that read and they're still pretty excited. They get into the back half of Exodus and all of a sudden they start getting bogged down. They're like Christian and the Slough of Despond. So they're just stuck in there. Then they get into Leviticus and they're like, I don't know what's going on. And so in all honesty, for a long time, I would start reading the Bible, especially when I was younger, and that's where I would get stuck. The other thing that a lot of people will do, they'll read it like it's in chronological order. They don't understand that a lot of the prophets are overlapping, and that's overlapping the history. And you have First and Second Samuel. Then you get into First and Second Kings, not so much overlapping there, but First and Second Chronicles is all overlapping, which it's still, you need to read it because you get a different perspective. There's some things that are there that you don't get when you're reading Kings, right? But a lot of people get confused in that. It's really hard to keep up with. When I was a young person, it was hard for me to keep up with that. But the article here, we'll get into that. It just says famed actor Tim Allen, who many will recognize today as the star of the sitcom Last Man Standing, said he is taking the time to thoroughly read the Bible from the Old Testament to the New Testament for the first time, saying the journey is not what he expected. I think most people would probably, I mean, even though what we said about his age, which he's actually 71 here, even though what we said about his age, I think a lot of people would probably be in that camp, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people do not understand the blessing that you get from reading God's Word. Now, we won't talk about the fact that he's reading the Jerusalem Bible, which is the Catholic Bible, and we're not Catholic. We love people who are Catholic, but we're not Catholic, and we think that of course, the Catholic faith, there's some things that they've got to get straightened out. But at the same time, we pray for our friends who are Catholic, and but he's reading. I'm assuming like in the Catholic Bible, maybe you have Maccabees and some of that, but. So we're looking here at this article, and it's interesting because when he was young, he gives a little bit of background here, and it said when he was 11, his father was killed by a drunk driver. Did you know that?
I didn't know that at all.
See, you learned something. We've been doing this show 8 minutes, and you've learned something about Tim Allen. But and you could see where that would shape a young person's life, right? So it just, when you read this article, it's interesting here because it actually says that in his time of grief, he asked himself whether he could have prevented his father's death. The actor confessed there was a period in his life when he attended church, but he didn't like the idea of God and was constantly a cynic. And I think that I have no clue about his background, but my guess is that it would be interesting to know the rationale for why he felt like maybe it was his fault. And a lot of times when you're young and that age, there's just no rationale. You're just struggling. But it says that he was dealing with that at that age, and that he didn't like the idea of God. Now that touches on something. because I think there are a lot of folks who don't like the idea of God.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who aren't believers, that's one of the things that they really struggle with. The scriptures tell us the carnal mind is at enmity with God. We read that in Romans, and it's interesting to me that that to me seems very honest. Uh, and there could be any number of reasons, because when you're that age, I'm sure you're wondering, well, why would my dad be taken from me?
Yeah.
Don't you imagine?
Yeah.
And so, just looking at it, I found that interesting. But here's something that in 1978, which I had known a little bit about this, but he was arrested at the Kalamazoo Battle Creek International Airport with over a pound of cocaine in his luggage.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
That's like Scarface.
Uh-huh.
That's say hello to my little friend.
Pew pew.
Yeah, that's I mean that's a whole thing. A pound. Well, I don't know. That's not Scarface. I'm joking. We don't want to advocate Scarface. By the way, do you know I've never watched Scarface?
I never have either.
I've never had a desire to. That does not impress me. I have seen that scene when they talk about like the film's greatest scenes and stuff, and
like on Mojo.
Yeah, and they've got the say hello to my little friend. That's all I know. That's the only that's the only line I know. I know it's a Brian De Palma film.
Yeah.
You know what else Brian De Palma made? The Untouchables. Now, that's a good movie.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's got Sean Connery. I like The Untouchables. Was that a good Sean Connery?
Yeah.
I'll have to start doing that more.
Yeah.
I think I'll just walk around.
I think you should.
Here, when I teach in a little bit, I'll teach you Sean Connery.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think I might get tuned out. But so he had the cocaine in his luggage. It says after he pleaded guilty to the charges, the actor spent 2 years in federal prison during his mid-20s. Now, I knew that. I knew he was in prison, wasn't sure what it was about. It says gradually, Allen surrendered himself to Jesus, and he began referring to him as the builder, to God as the builder. And this is a quote from him. I always do ask the builder, what did you want me to do? Allen said, and I do ask it, but you've got to be prepared for the answer. Whoever built me, this is too much, too weird that it happened by accident. It didn't happen by accident. And I think that that's an interesting thing to say, because I think when we look in the grand scheme of things, as far as how people are perceiving God, he comes to the knowledge of God, and essentially it's because he exists. Just the complexities in whatever his life is and what's going on, he can't deny the existence of God. And it reminds me in Romans 1, it says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, also to the Greek. It says, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Now, this is where we get into the meat of this, verse 18 of chapter 1 in Romans. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. It says, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. Now, it's interesting because Tim Allen, who is a comedian, he's got this serious side, evidently, that most people wouldn't think about, but he recognizes the existence of God. This is beyond whether he's truly a saved believer or not. There's no way we could know that, right? I mean, we don't know him. So I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying there's no way I could know that. I wouldn't say that one way or the other. But even in him, in the profession he's in, recognizes there has to be more, being that he's, created. Yeah. He's alive, right? So I think that's interesting. Of course, then they get into this whole thing in 2022 about Disney Plus and He wanted to do. They did the Santa Claus, I guess, a series. I haven't watched Disney Plus
Yeah, I
uh,
haven't.
in a long time. You know, they get all into the stuff, and I'm out on that. But uh, so he wanted to put Christ back in Christmas, and there's this whole conversation about that here. But and we could get into a whole talk about that. I don't want to spend that much time on Tim Allen, but it is interesting. The main crux of that article that I kind of took from it, the recognition of God in his own self existence, not consumed by the self, but that he exists. There has to be more to this thing. Do you take anything away from that?
I mean, I would say the same thing, and that's what I've always thought of how complex we have just the human body, how it works, how every single organ, bone, the blood vessels, all of it comes together to form a perfectly functioning human being. Yeah. And so,
and we turn back to dust.
Yeah. And I don't think that's at all a accident or by chance.
No, absolutely not. But and at the end of this thing, we turn back to what we're made from. And you think, when we look at something as complicated as for us, like a computer or something, you see all these intricate parts. But then when you think about a human being and the brain, just the brain, it's like a young Frankenstein, Sure, some of us have an abnormal brain. But, when you're looking at it, you go, man, just that, and I'm not trying to be gross, but the brain, it just looks like goo.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at a brain, but yet it functions at such an extremely high level, which tells me that, again, God is all powerful. He's omnipotent. He doesn't have to have these little intricate parts to put together that carries the information. He can take dirt, shape it to look like a goo, put it in a skull, and it functions. And here we are. Yeah. And I'm not making light. It's amazing to me. Second story that we're going to look at, and we won't spend as much time on this one, but I do have some thoughts on it. It's a story by Julian Chan Erickson, and it's Kids Online Bill Awaits House Vote. And it says, according to Pew Research Center, 96% of American teenagers use social media daily. I'm shocked. And it says, with nearly half saying they use it almost constantly. And that is a problem. They basically address, it says there's a correlation here, which is not a shock to me, a correlation between social media use and poor mental health. Growing evidence suggests a connection to anxiety, depression, loneliness. And it says some parents of children who have committed suicide or died of an overdose or after participating in an online challenge point to social media as the cause. Yeah. Now, I think that doesn't shock me, and I think it's very sad. So a bill has been proposed here. Some social media platforms already offer options to turn off sensitive content. We know that, but so it says parents, this bill, if it went through, it says that parents would also be offered more ways to monitor their kids' accounts. So in late July, the Senate overwhelmingly passed the Kids Online Safety Act, KOSA, K-O-S-A. It passed 91-3 in the Senate. That same day, the Senate also passed the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act. That would be top. That's not. They didn't say that. I'm throwing that in.
We're just adding our touch.
That's TOPPA, TOPPA. No, that's not it. But it's just the Teens Online Privacy Protection Act. It says, which would forbid tech companies from collecting data on underage users. KOSA would require companies to make any content associated with online bullying, illicit drug sales, or sexual exploitation unaccessible on children's accounts. I got no problem with that. Now, here's where they do get into a little bit of a problem when you look further down here, because there are people who they're detractors from this bill, and it says there's no legal definition of what kind of content makes a kid depressed. This is what they say. I'm pretty sure sin has something to do with making kids depressed. It's kind of like if you watch football all day on a Saturday. You know, I used to love to watch MMA, and one of the reasons I quit watching it so much is because they're so long. You know, you watch the fights and you're watching them, but they're, you know, when they start, it's like you start at what, 4 in the afternoon,
and you're
with
not
the
done till midnight.
yeah, you're starting with the early card, the early prelims, and by the time you get to the main event, it's midnight. That's 8 hours of just sitting there. And at some point you get convicted because, you know, you're thinking, well, I haven't spent 8 hours sitting here studying my Bible. And so I've got to where I just don't watch it much anymore. I'm not saying people are sinning if they watch some of the fights, but at the same time, I get it. So what I'm saying, how I'm addressing that, is that any time you're doing something outside of what the Lord would have you do, and I will tell you, that's even if you're not saved. I really believe one of the things that lead to so much discontent among young people today is that they spend time outside of God's will. They're separated from God. I've said it all the time. When I accepted Christ, I was a very depressed person. I wasn't wearing black everywhere I go. That came after I got saved. I became like Johnny Cash, only a little more girth, and I don't sing songs well. But you know, I wasn't that kind of depressed. I just on myself. I didn't tell people. It wasn't something I went because I just felt guilty. And I think a lot of times when young people feel guilty and depressed, or they feel depressed, it is guilt, that recognition that I'm separated from God. But it says here, it will be up to the Federal Trade Commission to decide what is a problem. And so here's where I can see a problem with this bill, because if the federal government is going to come in and decide what is appropriate and not appropriate, well, the federal government right now is advocating, a large portion of the federal is advocating, sex change operations for 7-year-olds. Well, obviously, that's not who I want dictating what is appropriate or not appropriate. And so it goes on to say that a Harris Federal Trade Commission might argue that pro-life content makes kids depressed. So we can't have pro-life. We've got to be pro-choice, right? That would be advocating. It says a Trump Federal Trade Commission might decide that climate change content makes kids. So we're not going to talk any about climate change. So I can see where both sides would be like, I don't want you controlling. It's kind of like the bill here in Oklahoma where we're talking about the Bible, and Walters is trying to get the Bible into the school through a historical component, which I don't have a problem with. Now I'll just tell you, other than who's teaching the Bible to my kids, that's a problem.
Because if they get so brainwashed that you have to fix it at home, you don't know if they are going to be able to be fixed at home.
Yeah, I mean, so what happens? What happens if somebody who doesn't believe in God at all? There's an atheist teaching a class. They're teaching the Bible, and everything that they're trying to do is trying to disprove everything that I believe in and trying to teach my kids at home. You know, it's a shame that we live in a world that's that messed up, but we do. And I just got to tell you that I don't know. I don't know what a good answer would be. This bill has a lot of things that could be really positive about it. Anything that helps curtail the time that kids are on. I think one of the things they were talking about in it is putting more safeguards on there. If you're a certain age, you don't have access to certain sites and things. But really, a lot of this is things that parents should be doing. Now, understanding that in the world we live in, your kid can be on the bus heading to the football game, and he may or she may not have a phone, but their friend does.
And it kind of reminds me of like when you're a kid and you get Facebook or Instagram and they ask you the age and you just say the age
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm 21.
Yeah, and no, you're 5.
And you see the picture. You know,
Yeah.
it happens every now and then. You see the profile picture. You're like, I don't, you know, this is I can't think of what there. You know, there's like a health issue, a disorder where you look really young when you're older, and there's not that many people that have that.
No.
So no, you see that. Well, we're going to get to the last story of the day here. We've got about we got about 4.5 minutes left on this deal, and it's going to take literally every minute of this because, folks, Dolly Parton has new cast iron cookware, and she's been working 9 to 5 on this thing, and Dolly has got it done. The thing that stood out to me, and by the way, this story is by Adam Rothbard. But I got to tell you, the thing that stood out to me is the story's written like Dolly's in there making cast iron cookware
from scratch.
She's making it. She developed it. It's kind of like her baking goods. You know, how Dolly. I'm going to come in here. No, I don't know how Dolly. I can't talk like Dolly, but nor do I want to really. But you know, it like she's cooking in the kitchen, and she says, "You know what? How could we mass produce enough dough to make 1,000,000 biscuits?"
Jesus.
You know, yeah, we're gonna make pizza dough. I don't even know what she makes. You know, Mom was talking about that. She's like, "Oh, Dolly's got a cake I want to try." I don't know. And since I've been on a diet, I can't try it. Well, I think it's like Betty Crocker. I may be lying. I don't want to plug anybody. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. It's somebody that, you know, one of the big baking, like the big three, like the old automobile days.
Stick to her singing.
Well, it says here she's made an impact in the culinary world, Lex. That's what it says. She's got a cookbook coming out. She does a line of baked goods with, no, I'm sorry, it was not Betty. It was Duncan Hines. Old Duncan. But anyway, these fudge brownies look especially nice. That's what he says. But I got to tell you, I'm just looking at the picture, and you can't see it on a podcast, but I'm looking at this, and there's a 8-inch Dolly Parton cast iron trivet here. And I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. You know what a trivet is?
Yeah.
And I thought it might be pronounced trivet because it's 3. It's got like 3 little posts. But it's not a trivet. It's a trivet. And the trivet sits on the table. And then you set the pan on the trivet to keep from burning or scarring the table. And this trivet goes above and beyond because this bad boy, it can handle heat up to 525 degrees.
I didn't realize you could.
That reminds me of the episode of Coach where Luther eats the hot dog and it's molten.
That's molten.
Yeah, he says that's it was I had molten lava in my mouth. This 525 degrees is hot. It's real hot. It's too hot. But this thing will keep your table from getting messed up. And then when you look at this, it says she's got a 13.25-inch Dolly Parton preseason skillet. I don't know what that says, but it's got her face in it. So I think the face is on the bottom. It looks like it's on the bottom. So that's and that's interesting. Then they've got the wall clock. It's not a skillet. You can't use that. See, it's got the hands, so you don't want to use it. But it says working 9 to 5. Just when you look at that, you're going to think, what a way to make a living. I've got that on my wall.
That is their inspiration for the day.
No, let me tell you something. The inspiration for the day is the last one. And this little bad boy is an 8-inch preseason skillet. And you can't cook with this. It's got the teardrop handle, and it's got altered lyrics from the mega hit Jolene.
Oh.
And it says, Jolene, 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 please don't take my pan.
Let's kill it.
So that's the Dolly Parton cookware.
That's all you need.
That's all you need. I mean, the Beatles said love, but Dolly Parton says you need some cast iron skillet cookware in your life. So, folks, we have reached the end of our inaugural podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. So I just want to tell you to remember that the Word of God is a weapon. And until next time, we'll see you later.